Did you know that the Vietnam War is the longest war in American history? I have recently done extensive research to learn more about the history of the Vietnam War. I'll provide you with information about the beginning, middle, and end of the Vietnam War. According to the book titled The Vietnam War, A Concise International History by Mark Atwood Lawrence, the Vietnam War began brewing in the mid-20th century due to decisions being made during that time. After gaining independence as a country in 1954, Vietnam became divided into two parts, separated by the 17th parallel. This map shows the division of Vietnam separated by the 17th parallel. The northern half of Vietnam was fixated to communism and controlled by the Viet Minh. The southern half of Vietnam was completely against communism and controlled by French-led forces. Because the country of Vietnam was divided by communism, tensions began to rise quickly between the North and South. The North targeted the South by killing Southern Vietnamese officials. Leading up to the war, violence was a main tactic in Northern Vietnam's plan to take over South Vietnam. The factor of violence, along many other factors, ultimately led to the beginning of the Vietnam War this same year. As expressed in the book titled Vietnam War by Kaplan and Martin Gay, the Vietnam War lasted a gruesome 20 years. In the beginning of the war, the domino theory led the United States to become involved. With the domino theory in mind, the United States believed that if the country of Vietnam was not properly aided, it would fall to the hands of communism. This theory, at the time, had proven to be solid and gave the United States a willingness to aid the country of Vietnam. Next in the war came the coup of Southern Vietnamese President Ngo Dinh Diem. The coup of the president came about due to the fact that he was a dictator in many cases. Diem was assassinated during this coup in order to stabilize the situation in southern Vietnam, but it instead made the government even more corrupt than it was before. A major event in the Vietnam War was the Gulf of Tonkin incidences. These incidences were between the United States and northern Vietnam in the Gulf of Tonkin. The Gulf of Tonkin incidences were a main cause of the push for action in Vietnam by the United States. As shown in this picture, the Gulf of Tonkin incidences occurred August 2nd through August 4th in 1964. This picture shows the U.S. destroyer USS Maddox prior to the Gulf of Tonkin incidences. After the incidences occurred, General William Westmoreland was appointed by the United States to oversee further operations in Vietnam. As a result, more than 200,000 American troops were stationed to Vietnam that same year. After gaining much experience in Vietnam, Westmoreland suggested that instead of fighting the Vietnamese with regular warfare, the United States fight a war of attrition, kill as many enemy soldiers as possible, count the bodies, and publicize the number to demoralize the northern Vietnamese. The supplying of American troops to Vietnam for an endless war resulted in many riots in the United States that even led to a series of bloodbaths. This picture shows the protesting of Americans to end the war in Vietnam. The next major event of the Vietnam War was the Tet Offensive. This offensive was a surprise attack on the southern Vietnamese forces launched by the northern Vietnamese. Although their efforts were strong, the North Vietnamese were not able to overtake the southern Vietnamese forces. This picture shows the Tet Offensive, which occurred in 1968. After the Tet Offensive, the U.S. implemented a policy called Vietnamization, which slowly pulled American troops from the country and instead provided the southern Vietnamese with efficient materials for war. Toward the end of this strenuous war, another event called the My Lai Massacre arose. This was a series of war crimes committed by United States soldiers during the Vietnam War. The My Lai Massacre not only caused riots in Vietnam, but it also caused many riots in the United States as well. As seen in this picture, the My Lai Massacre occurred on March 16, 1968. The My Lai was the name of the Vietnam village with a population of about 700 people. American soldiers killed about 350 of those people. Soon after the My Lai Massacre occurred, an anti-war movement became started, and it eventually resulted in American troops finally returning home. After many long years of fighting, the Vietnam War came to an end in 1973. As stated in the book titled Historical Dictionary of the War in Vietnam by Ronald Bruce Frankham, The Vietnam War officially ended in 1973, but fighting did not end. The ending of the Vietnam War was decided by the Paris Peace Accords. During this time, the United States completely pulled troops out of Vietnam. This was decided because no progress was being made, yet American lives were still being lost. The horrors of the Vietnam War were officially over, but the United States spent decades recovering from the overall experiences of the war. I have provided you with the history of the beginning, middle, and end of the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was a 20-year war that resulted in millions of casualties of not only the Vietnamese, but of Americans and people of other countries as well.